Hi, my name is Kate Malberger, and I'm back with another installment of my series on how should I quilt this quilt top. I started this series in the hopes of inspiring others to dig out those quilt tops and get them quilted, and to take it step by step. It's a creative process. I don't always know when I pull that quilt top out of my basket how I'm going to tackle it, but I do know how to get started. So let's do that with the quilt top I have for today. It is a small wall hanging, and I'll show that to you. So this is the little quilt wall hanging size that I will be working on today. These 6 blocks have been in my stash for quite a while, so I don't recall whether they were gifted to me or I bought them. I just know I cannot take credit for making them, but they've been in my stash so long, I figured it was time to get them made into a quilt top. And I intentionally put light background fabric between the blocks so that I would have some good areas to practice my ruler work, quilting with rulers in those light colored areas. As you can see, I've gone ahead and taken the first step, which is always to baste your quilt top. I like to pin baste, and then I also put straight pins around the outside edge so that when I take this to my machine to quilt, the first thing I'll do is baste around the outside edge of that quilt just to hold the layers together where I want them. And then I'm going to go ahead and do some stitching in the ditch, which will be right here in this area. I'm going to go around all of that border in the ditch, and then probably do in the ditch around each of these squares. And that should anchor my quilt nicely, so that then I'm free to go ahead and do more intricate quilting in any section that I choose. So I'm going to go ahead and take the first step, which is to go around the outside edge and anchor the middle of the quilt as well. Okay, I have basted around the outside edge 1/8 of an inch, and I have done all of my in the ditch quilting. It's hard to see, but all of these squares now have stitching surrounding them. And now I'm ready for the creative part. I've done everything I have to anchor the quilt. So as I was doing this, I kind of came up with some ideas. I just recently purchased Amanda Murphy's heart rulers. It's a nice pack of three different sizes of heart designs. Hold that up so you can see better. I used them on a sample that I made, just a 2 layers of fabric with batting between, so that I could practice. And as you see on this one, it's good I practiced. I went out of the design area a little bit into the seams that I drew. So I tried again with this smallest of the 3 rulers, and that seemed to work out well to create this design. And I'm happy with that. I really like that design. I did a little bit of free motion in there, which I love to add to my ruler work. But I thought while I was doing that, I remembered that I also have Amanda Murphy's flower rulers. And I thought, because of the design of the blocks, that maybe the flower design would be more appropriate. So I went ahead and did this sample with the 3 smallest rulers. There's 4 in a pack, and I used the 3 smaller ones to create this design, and then meandered in the center. And I think that's what I'm going to go with. So I'll go ahead and do that in each of the 2 larger squares, and then on these side squares I'll do some variation, maybe just a half of a flower. I haven't decided for sure on that, but I will start with the 2 blocks and see where it leads me. I've completed the ruler work on all of the white background squares and triangles, and I'm very happy with how that turned out. I did a little bit of free motion uh, meandering in the center of the flowers, and then on the side triangles I did partial flowers to fill those spots as well. I now need to tackle these flower baskets. And this is going to be a challenge because some of the baskets already have some embellishment done on them. Usually it's a good idea to do this kind of thing with buttons after the quilting is done. They get in the way of the rulers. Even if you're just doing meandering, you bump into them. So I think I'm just going to do the bare minimum here and do in the ditch around each basket and see if they're already laying pretty flat. So I don't think I need to do a lot of quilting in there. So my plan is to just in the ditch around each basket. And then when the quilt is completely finished, I'm going to go ahead and add some embellishment to the blocks that don't have anything, just to balance that out. But for now, I need to get these baskets quilted. So I finished the basket blocks by doing some in the ditch quilting around each of the baskets and then adding just a touch of ruler work to finish them up. And I did do some ruler work on these yellow flowers as well, but all of the baskets have a little bit of ruler work on them. Nothing crazy. The blocks, as I said, were laying nice and flat, and I didn't need to do a lot of quilting on them to get them to look like a balanced part of the quilt. My next step, final step in quilting this quilt is to decide what I'm going to do on this border. And as you can see, it is a busier print. So I'm not going to do any intricate ruler work on that. I think I'm going to go ahead and just meander around the outside border. It's already anchored, you know, I've done in the ditch quilting and basted around the outside edge. So I'm going to go ahead and do the meandering around the outside, and then I'll probably go ahead and trim it up and talk a little bit about the binding. Okay, I have not finished the meandering yet. I've done this side though, and I wanted to show you the reason why I chose to use this as part of the design elements for this quilt. If you remember, this side of the quilt, the border, was a little wavy. I'm experiencing a little bit of it up here as well. And when you fill with a meandering stitch, it just kind of eases in all of that stretchiness. I don't know if it was my fabric or an error on my part, but I did get a little bit of stretchiness when I sewed the sides on. The top and bottom weren't so bad, but the meandering is certainly correcting all of that, and it's laying nice and flat, and it does help that I basted around the outside edge. That's containing everything until I get to the quilting of it. Okay, I'll continue onward. And this little project is finished. I've meandered around the borders. And you can see that a little bit with the shadowing, but it's not crazy detail like ruler work might be, but it does have a nice finish to it. The other thing I did was I went ahead and trimmed it and put the binding on it. I usually like to use a little bit of contrast in the between the binding and the quilt, but because these blocks I did not make these blocks, so I didn't have any of the scraps to, you know, maybe pull this dark color out here in a faux piped binding, but I think it's finished off nicely. And finally, the last thing I did was to embellish the two blocks. This block and this block didn't have any of the embellishments on them, so I went ahead and did a ruched flower in this block, and I had some old, these are loose, some old buttons in my button jar that I added to that block. And I think it finished it off great. I hope that the owner of these blocks would be happy with what I did with them. And I'm happy to add this quilt to my collection.